We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
I was furious to hear about these things.
Hello and welcome to another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, the political editor of the Daily Record. Joining me today is Douglas Dickie of the Scottish Daily Express, and remotely we have John Ferguson, who is the political editor of the Sunday Mail. So no prizes for guessing what we're going to be talking about. It's a pretty momentous day. Donald Trump has been elected as US President for a second time, comfortably defeating Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate and also the current Vice President of the United States. It looks like he's won the popular vote as well as the crucial Electoral College. And it also looks like Congress is going to be in Republican hands. So he has a mandate and he has the legal leeway to introduce legislation, have it passed and whatnot. So as you can imagine, there is alarm in progressive circles. People are asking what happens next because he's made some pretty dark noises about going after his enemies. But before we come to Trump's second agenda, Douglas, it wasn't a massive surprise, was it, the result? Maybe the scale of it, but I think there was a belief that he was going to win this election.
Paul, I'm a great believer that the bookies never really get it wrong. You never meet a poor bookie, and the bookies had Trump as the overwhelming favourite for most of it. The pollsters disagreed. Yet another example of polling companies missing out on swathes of dissatisfied voters. People, in middle America, they work a factory job in Detroit. Somebody phones them up and asks who you're going to vote for. They're, rightly or wrongly, immediately suspicious of that. They keep quiet about it. We've seen it in the UK with quiet Conservatives, and I think you're seeing it in America with quiet Republicans, or at least Trump supporters. I think the Democrats took voters for mugs, to be honest. For months and months, they insisted Joe Biden was physically, mentally capable of running for president when it was obvious to everyone else that he wasn't. They then brought a really uninspiring candidate in, seemingly jettisoned her in with no real process. Harris is undoubtedly has enjoyed a good legal career. She's a capable and able public administrator, but against someone, love him or loathe him, who's got a clear and precise message. He's pretty charismatic to some people. I don't really think she stood. I don't think she stood a chance. And we were talking earlier to somebody about it who covered this election quite extensively, and they still don't really know what Harris's message was. What was her kind of tagline? Trump's obviously got "Make America Great Again." He was, very bullish, improve the economy, crack down on immigration, stop, take action or take America out of these foreign wars. You might not agree with it, but it was a clear message, and I think a lot of Democrats and a lot of people, you're talking about progressives. They just, again, they forget about your average punter who cares about money, money in their pocket. And ultimately, they don't see, they see their world right in front of them in their home. And it's about who they perceive to be sticking up for them. And I think ultimately that's what's won the election for Trump.
John, I don't know what you think, but I see there are similarities between the result today and what we got in the general election in July. So if you look at Harris versus Trump, Trump was very, very good at battering the Democratic candidate over rising inflation and the fact that people were going to supermarkets, having to pay more for their gas. That was really hitting them in the pockets, and he went to town on that. And also as well, immigration, people pouring over the Mexican border, this feeling like immigration was out of control. he went to town on that. And if you look at Sunak versus Starmer, the Tories had made big promises on cutting immigration. They didn't do that. Immigration actually went up. Reform fed into that. And of course, we had high inflation as well in the UK. So in a sense, both the Conservatives at a UK level and the Democrats in the US have been punished over those two issues.
Yeah, I think that's right. One of the key, or the number one thing that people were concerned about was the economy in America. At least that's what exit polls would suggest. And Trump's message on that is very specific and strong. He's a protectionist. He painted Kamala Harris as the kind of, part of this global elite that don't really care about jobs in America. They're more concerned about the health of the global economy, and they're quite happy to see jobs go to China and India and all the rest of it. Trump has said that's absolutely the wrong way to go. He wants to put huge tariffs on Chinese goods and Indian goods, and he's also really, really strong in this idea that you just can't have uncontrolled immigration. These are two of the main points that we saw Reform campaigning on in the general election. I think even though Reform didn't come close to winning the election here, I think that this result really will strike fear into the hearts of Labour strategists who are going to see that next time around things could be very different unless they can really up their game.
And that's it, isn't it? You know, you look at Joe Biden and he did have some achievements on the economy. I mean, a lot of jobs being created in America, but people just didn't feel it. They didn't believe it. I can't remember which piece of legislation it was that he passed. I think it was maybe the Infrastructure Act, which was a pretty good piece of legislation. I remember reading a poll which said that most Americans actually thought that it was introduced under Donald Trump's first term. So you're in a position where you're actually pushing through decent pieces of legislation, but the other guy's getting the credit. So I think politics is about not just having good policies, but you have to be in a position where you can sell them in such a way where you're getting credit for them as well. Because it's ludicrous if your opponents are getting plaudits for something you yourself have done. But the point you make about Labour is a good one. Biden's come in, and obviously he's not Starmer in the sense that Starmer's a much younger man. But if you do not deal with the issues at hand, like the economy and immigration, then you're always going to be vulnerable after 4 or 5 years. And that's the challenge that's facing Labour. They made big promises about change, about getting the economy back on track, about fixing the foundations. But you'd have to say after 100 odd days with the winter fuel payment row and the freebies row, they were giving the impression of behaving like the Conservatives. And the jury is still very much out on this budget and £40 billion of tax rises. You can see what's going to happen to Keir Starmer in 4 or 5 years if he does not deliver for the people across the UK. You know, what happened to Biden and Harris is going to happen to him. So you would think that maybe his strategists and his advisors, Dougie, are looking at this and thinking, you know, we have to learn lessons from what's happened in this election. And, you know, if they don't, then they're going to be out in the rear.
I think one of the major issues is when we talk about the economy, when politicians talk about the economy, they're talking about the national economy, they're talking about GDP. Your average voter doesn't care about GDP. They care about me. They care about, you know, how much money, you know, their spending power, how much money's in their wallet. And I think that's, you know, ultimately what's won it for Trump and what Labour's biggest issue will be. We talk about immigration, but the simple fact of the matter is if you fix the economy the way the average voter wants you to fix the economy, you get, you know, more money in their pocket, people feel better about themselves. All of a sudden, immigration probably doesn't seem like that big a deal, doesn't seem like that big an issue. And in some ways, everything else is it's a symptom of you know, it's the economy, stupid. It always comes back to that. But I think what else Labour should learn from it is not to get, you know, I don't really like using the term go woke, go broke, but they can't let themselves get bogged down in these kind of fringe issues. I don't think the trans debate has decided the American election, but I've no doubt that millions of voters look at how much energy is poured into that and think, what the hell? What has this got to do with the daily life of your average American? And we see it here in the UK as well. These kind of culture wars. It seems weird saying that because Donald Trump obviously plays into those culture wars very, very heavily. But if Labour are to win again in 5 years, they can't let it become a culture war thing. They can't get bogged down in that. In Scotland, we've seen it. With the SNP seemingly obsessing over these. We done another story again today about these 24 genders. And your average voter sees that and they think, what the. It just. I think it puts people off, and I think it puts. And it opens the door for people like Donald Trump to come in. I've got to say another thing on a personal level. I think the last thing, again, your average voter wants to see is a multi-millionaire superstar singer or Hollywood actor dictating to you how you should vote. I really think that should be a lesson that political parties should learn. Because they don't speak for you, they're speaking at you. For far too long now, politicians have spoke at the public rather than to the public. And Donald Trump, for all his many faults, which I'm sure we'll discuss, appears to talk to them, or the average man in the street thinks he's talking to him. And it has been predominantly men, although not as many women broke for Harris's, we think, but he kind of speaks directly to them. And that's why he's won the election.
John, see if you go back to Brexit. One of the things that struck me about that campaign and that vote was that people on the Remain side always seem to make a distinction between the economy and immigration. Yet if you actually spoke to Leave voters, they thought that the economy and immigration were one and the same. And I follow the US presidential election as I did, and I feel like the Democrats made exactly the same mistake. They try and sort of hive off the issues, whereas in terms of the voters that they really need to have on board, they see immigration as an economic issue. I mean, do you think that maybe the Democrats are kind of increasingly out of touch with the people that they're trying to woo?
Yeah, I think that we see this same mistake being made in the UK as well. They're failing to make the positive case for immigration and actually pointing out that, for example, in Scotland, if we don't have immigration, then our economy is going to be in big trouble because we've got an ageing population. We need young people coming in that are going to be going out working and paying taxes. I think you're absolutely right that the economy is a huge thing for Labour now in the UK, and they have chosen quite a dangerous strategy in that the budget was really was quite a left-wing budget in the sense that they've put up taxes on industry, and they've also decided to borrow a lot more by changing the borrowing rules. And the idea behind that is that they believe the way to kickstart the economy in the UK is to invest in infrastructure and training and education and new railways and all that sort of thing, and that is going to attract the inward investment, i.e. big international companies coming and setting up here. And that's a big risk that I think that they are correct to see that infrastructure is something that needs to be invested in. But the question is whether Google, Facebook, these kind of companies look at the UK and think we'll set up an office there because they've got great railways, or whether they look at the UK and just think we'll invest there if they've got a tax regime that's beneficial to us. I suspect that in a lot of cases it might be a latter. So I think that's the risk that Labour run here. They've talked a lot about the economy and the fact that they're going to fix foundations and get Britain working again, but the way that they're going about it is to increase tax on business, in particular increase tax on jobs, on companies employing people. and just hoping that the money that they can take in from that and changing borrowing rules are going to help create a better environment for businesses to flourish. I get the. Then you've got, so I mean, you can see you're going to get to the next election where Labour are hopefully, even if they get that if there seems to be evidence that has worked, they are still going to be absolutely battered by the Tories and reform on immigration. It kind of looks like that's just not a problem that you can solve, even if you want to, given that the Conservatives failed to do it for 10 years. But you can be rest assured that it's going to be the absolute number one issue on the Conservatives' campaigning platform going forward, given that they made it pretty much the number one issue when they were in power, and they were manifestly failing to do anything about it. You can imagine how obsessed they're going to be with it now that Labour are in power, and they can use it as a stick to beat them with. And so it's going to be really difficult, because you get, no matter how much you want to talk about the economy, when you've got someone else who is creating the idea of a massive crisis on your borders and then accusing you of failing to solve that problem. You can't avoid it. You can't really claim that that you've solved the problem, and so it's just never going to be easy, is it?
No, I mean, it also raises the question: what is a Trump second term actually going to do that affects the UK and Scotland? As you can imagine, most of the policies he's going to try and implement are for Americans only, whether that's on abortion, guns, tax cuts, or whatever. But as we've seen this morning, because it's received a bit of coverage, he has floated this idea of 20% tariffs on foreign goods. Now, put aside what your view is on that, but that would be massively inflationary for ordinary American consumers. John Swinney, the First Minister, who backed Harris but has now congratulated Trump on his victory this morning, he's already out the traps quickly about the prospect of 20% tariffs on Scotch whisky. Obviously, the US is a huge market for that product. Dougie, I think that tariffs of that nature would be most unwelcome in the UK, wouldn't they? Particularly for some of our own key industries.
Yeah, well, I mean, Scotch whisky was the one I was going to kind of raise straight away. I think what we've learned for the election, we obviously say that the American president is the leader of the free world, but your American voters not voting for the leader of the free world, they're voting for the American president, and quite frankly, 99% of them don't really give a toss about how their policies might impact on other parts of the world. Economists have obviously warned about tariffs. Again, it remains to be seen what he does with them. He did implement some in his first kind of administration. I think the big impact on the rest of the world is obviously going to be, Labour might need to open the purse strings on defence spending at a time where they could probably do without that.
Although, to be fair, I think it's other NATO countries that are probably
Yeah,
not contributing as much as they should. I think Britain's got a pretty good record on that.
I think NATO, bigwigs will be a little bit worried this morning. Trump is a businessman, I suppose, and he's going to look at people who he can do deals with. And I don't think it really matters to him who they are. Ironically, the world was probably a safer place during his first presidency than it was under Biden, whether that's by accident or design, but obviously Biden had the kind of botched Afghanistan affair, and Putin felt emboldened to invade Ukraine. And
to be fair, I think that invasion had already started with Crimea.
Well, yeah, obviously. It's actually been ongoing 10 years, but we always seem to think about it as from February 2022. And obviously, you've got the situation in Gaza now. These aren't necessarily linked to Trump becoming president, Biden becoming president. But I think there's going to be a few nervous people in matters of defence, because Trump, quite frankly, he's not been a great defender of NATO.
No,
he's
I think he might sell out Ukraine. I think when he says that the war is going to end, what he means is that the bits of Ukraine that
I mean, for all
have been illegally occupied, just given to Putin.
For all Trump's bullishness and kind of, he wants to present himself as this macho man, it seems an awful lot of his deal-making involves him giving in to the other side, caving in and saying, right, okay, just to get a deal over the line, just to say, I was able to do this. And Zelensky right now will be a worried man. Putin, I think, will be pretty happy. But again, I think another major issue is the last time the Trump administration still probably had enough people to keep him in check, to keep him in line. I don't think that's the case this time. I think he's going to fill it with an awful lot of people who will embolden him. And yeah, I mean, we're in for a interesting ride over the next 4 years.
John, just back to the tariffs issue in Scotland. Most of the Holyrood leaders came out for Harris, so Alex Cole-Hamilton actually went out to Pennsylvania and campaigned for Harris. Didn't do much good in the end. Anas Sarwar was also pro-Harris. Yes. And John Swinney also came out for Harris. Do you think he maybe regrets that? I mean, do you think that Holyrood leaders, when it comes to foreign elections, should keep their mouth shut, given the fact that we're going to have to work and have relations with whoever wins?
Yeah, I mean, if you remember back, Nicola Sturgeon actually banned Donald Trump from Scotland at one stage, so there is a long history of them getting involved in American politics in ways that it's kind of difficult to see how really there's any practical advantage in slagging off someone who's very likely to become the next president of the United States. I think with Trump, we know what we're going to get. He's like a half senile narcissist who's going to talk absolute nonsense. He's got very little sort of connection with reality sometimes in the way that he waffles on about things. I thought it was hilarious that up until about midnight last night, he was talking about massive cheating going on in the election until this morning when he'd won it. And now, I think clearly it was the fairest thing that had ever been run now. So we kind of...
Yeah, we're not hearing much about cheating anymore, are we? That seems to have gone...
Funny that, isn't it? How it seems to have been no cheating at all now. And so you kind of know what you're going to get in that sense. But I think that one of the few policies that I think you can sort of rely on him following through, whether it's exactly the 20% rate or not, who knows, but he has been really, really clear that he's a protectionist president. He believes that it's worth people having to pay more money for a TV set or a bottle of whiskey if what you can do there is create thousands of jobs in the Rust Belts of America again. And, that's a valid economic idea, I guess. But the thing with that sort of a trade war is that generally other countries react to it with their own tariffs, and suddenly you've got this situation where international trades, is not what it was because everybody's competing to keep each other's goods out of their economy, and it doesn't tend to end well. So it's going to be really interesting to see how he proceeds with that and how others react. I mean, I get that. The other thing is that Donald Trump doesn't seem to be that big on war generally. They would prefer to, I think, build condos in Gaza and Ukraine than have wars there, because that's just the thing that he does. It's how he makes money. And arguably, if there is having a president who is pro-finding some sort of resolution in Ukraine is going to be good for Europe, rather than having a president that wants to continue that sort of difficult war that it's difficult to see the end of. I thought it was interesting what you said earlier, that people don't want to see sort of out of touch celebrities backing politicians, and that Trump's clear of that. But I mean, it is interesting. I think this is one of the most interesting things to come out of this result, is that not only is Trump a billionaire businessman, but his main campaigning partner has been Elon Musk, who is, I'm not sure if he's the richest man in the world at the moment, but he's certainly one of the richest people in the world. He owns social media and car companies and rocket companies, and is obviously now in an incredibly powerful position. I think he's going to set up a new department within the American government, and I think what he does now and the sort of influence that he exerts now in America and on the international stage is almost going to be more interesting than what Trump does next.
How long before they fall out, though, which they will inevitably do? I mean, Trump's got such a massive ego. Musk has got such a massive ego. I just think that they're headed for a fall at some point.
Trump also had Hulk Hogan on his team, so I mean, not all the celebrities were breaking for Harris, the big names. But as well, I'd just say we were talking about Scotland. Trump obviously loves Scotland, and isn't it great to see a Scottish businessman do so well on the world stage?
I think Nixon had Scottish roots as well. So I mean, what an inheritance for the world. We've given America and the wider world Richard Nixon and Donald Trump.
He'll be here next year, likely, for the opening of his. He's got another golf course opening just outside Aberdeen. So I wonder if he'll put in an appearance. We might see him.
I think he was over in Scotland, wasn't he? Within weeks of winning the last time. So, who knows?
I can't imagine he's going to be queuing up to meet our First Minister, given our First Minister's pre-election comments. It seems like he's going to have quite a troubled relationship with the Prime Minister as well, given that wee spat about Labour activists going over to campaign for Harris. But I think that when it comes to the world stage, I don't think that his focus is going to be on the UK and certainly not Scotland. It will be Ukraine, it will be the Middle East, and it'll be other places. It's not going to be us. So, I mean, I don't think it's a positive election result for the UK by any means, but I can't imagine we're going to be his target.
No, and I think despite everything, I don't think, he doesn't really seem to hold a grudge. I mean, Boris Johnson said some pretty nasty things about him, and that seems to be water off a duck's back. So maybe he will meet John Swinney. Whether John Swinney wants to meet him is another matter. And I think he's actually expressed, I think people say that he's quite impressed with Keir Starmer's ability to win such a massive majority at Westminster. So I think that wee spat will get forgotten about pretty quickly, to be honest.
I think we know who will be backing going into the next election, mind you. Nigel Farage is probably going to be.
Oh, he might be the new ambassador. You never know. He might get a job in some capacity. Because I think Farage was on the stage, and I don't think that Trump's got a stronger ally than Farage, which is another pretty revolting aspect of all of this. But look, I think we've run out of time. So thanks again to John. Thanks to Dougie for his thoughts. As I said, it was a pretty momentous day. I don't think that the Daily Record really got the result that they wanted. I think we're not betraying any state secrets to say that we would prefer Harris to win, but the American people have spoken, and that is that. So I hope you enjoyed the episode, and please join us again next week.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
I was furious to hear about these things.